Emanuel Lasker, The Life of a Chess Master. Dr. Jhanak. Emanuel Lasker, The Life of a Chess Master. Chapter 3. The Lure of Professional Chess. But in the late 80s it was still a far cry to Bertold having a professorship and clinic of his own and to Emanuel being world famous and rid of material worries. He had finished grammar school, to be sure, and he had entered the university, but in his school of life he was still having a hard time in one of the lower forms. He was sick and tired of spending hours in the tea room to earn some miserable pittance, and he was duly impressed when someone told him that the great Café Kaiserhof was about to stage its annual chess tournament, open to all comers and renowned for its fairly generous prizes. Young Lasker plucked up courage and entered the pompously furnished and brilliantly lit café, its huge mirrors cruelly reflecting the contrast of his own shoddy clothes and the elegance and comfort of carefree airliners and tourists sipping their coffee and chocolate and munching huge cakes with lashings of whipped cream. Shyly he slouched through this unaccustomed atmosphere of palatial luxury, and diffidently approached the door of the large room reserved for the chess fraternity. And lo and behold, here he found people looking just as shabby and starved as he was, but they seemed to be quite unaware of their sartorial shortcomings and pinched faces. They were, all of them, completely absorbed by those 32 pieces of wood cunningly aligned on 64 squares. Forthwith, young Lasker felt at home and at ease, felt happy and secure in having something in common with all these people in that large and smoky room, their common knowledge about those 64 squares, their common ambition in guiding those 32 pieces. He felt the bliss and power of solidarity, and he learned that even the pariahs of life can achieve something by collective effort. Another revelation was in store for him. He was surprised to realize that he had come to be a very strong chess player. He had never taken the game seriously enough to bother about his own standing, but now it appeared that no one in that tournament was his equal, no one even managed to draw against him. He won every single game. No one had ever won that annual event at the café quite so convincingly. The lure of professional chess. 21. Best of all, there was quite a generous prize, enough to appease the constant rumbling of Emanuel's stomach for a week or two. But then what? Back again to the old grind, back to the constant worries of how to provide for the most primitive needs. It was all very well sitting in one's quiet little attic, surrounded by books and wrestling with serene philosophical and mathematical problems, but it was hard going on an empty stomach. Once again the temptation of a chess tournament approached him, one much bigger and more important than the amateurish event in the CAF6 Kaiserhof. Someone told Emanuel that there was such a thing as the German Chess Federation, a huge and nationwide organization which, once every other year, organized quite a string of tournaments in some big city. It was in Berlin in 1881, in Nuremberg in 1883, in Hamburg in 1885, in Frankfurt in 1887, and this time it was to be in Breslau. Bert Tarrasch, who used to be an habitué at the old ladies' tea room, was going, and surely, after his sensational success in the Kaiserhof tournament, young Lasker could be sure of an invitation as well. Emanuel yielded to the temptation, and deep down in his heart he knew that if he was successful, and he would be successful, it meant chess as a profession, it meant goodbye to the university and to philosophy and to mathematics, for quite some time at any rate. But had he any other choice? He could not see one. Emanuel went to Breslau. Lasker's star was about to rise on a firmament studded with chess celebrities. Emanuel Lasker was set on his peculiar way of life. Those who have never seen a chess tournament, and most people haven't, may have a very wrong conception of it. It is certainly nothing like some big football match or tennis tournament where every minute, every second may bring some sensation, the development breathlessly watched by an excited crowd. When reading a newspaper report about some particularly sensational chess event it may seem to be very much like it, but it isn't. Whoever first enters a tournament hall will be disappointed by the paucity of the onlookers. But then, the vast majority of devotees, and there are far more of them than any cup final crowd, will wait for the game to be published in their Sunday paper or chess magazine, quietly to play it over at their own fireside. Those who go to watch the actual game will be attending rather than watching, the simple reason being that, once one has seen the masters brooding over their boards, there is nothing much to watch, not, at any rate, until another move is made. And that may take quite a while, and one might as well watch it on the big wall board. 22. Emanuel Lasker, next door where one can carry on a conversation in more than a whisper. Watching the masters actually make their moves is like standing in a cave waiting for a stalactite to drop. There may be one every 10 or 20 minutes, and then there is solemn silence again, and we can imagine we are listening to the heartbeat of eternity while feeling slightly embarrassed and irritated by the apparently inactive and uneventful passage of time. Of course, it is far from being inactive and uneventful. Just as the lime in the cave takes its 10 or 20 minutes for the next stalactite, atom by atom, to grow and fatten until it is ready to drop, so the next move is being generated cell by cell in the master's brain until it is ready to be made. It is an uncanny and rather awkward thing to watch, and it makes us uncomfortable to feel the loneliness of the thinking brain, its splendid and total isolation from the rest of the world, indeed from everything except the evolution of certain ideas on the board and the silent passage of time. Not so silent sither, for this lapse of time is registered by a very special device called a chess clock. In point of fact, two clocks linked in a case. Having made his move, the player presses a button at his end of the double clock, thereby causing his clock to stop and the other one to start. When the opponent has made his move, he reverses the procedure by pressing the button at his end, thereby causing time to stand still for himself while for the opponent it ticks on audibly enough. It is this constant ticking that acts as a spur no less than as additional labor pains in the birth of ideas. Incessantly and inexorably the ticking warns, act. Act quickly. Come to a decision. For if you overstep your time limit by as much as a second circumflex accent, you forfeit your game, however good your position. Hence, while the brain functions as a brake for hasty action, the clock acts as a spur for activity, and when adding the positional and combinative deliberations demanded by the actual position on the board, we can well imagine the turmoil of conflicting thoughts and emotions raging in the players' minds. Even though we onlookers see nothing but two men deep in thought and taking a long time to get a move on, a good enough reason for the difficulties of making a chess tournament a spectacle sufficiently attractive for mass audiences. The only exception to the rule, as we shall see, seems to be Russia. In modern international tournaments the usual time limit is $2 hours for the first 40 moves and $0 hour each for successive reeks. URNFPC. The lure of professional chess. 23. Naturally it is the very fact of a game of chess being so unspectacular which causes the difficulties of financing such a spectacle. To stress the point, Lasker liked to tell a story concerning the chess player's pretty young wife who had come along with her husband to watch a tournament. She was intrigued by one of the masters being particularly deep in thought and taking an uncommonly long time over his move. The young lady was fascinated by so much concentration and she patiently persevered at that particular board. She seemed to think that something gigantic must result from so much thought. When half an hour had passed and the master still sat brooding over the board, the lady was almost trembling with the sort of thrill she would feel watching a particularly exciting rally in the finals at Wimbledon. At long last the master stirred from his reverie, and as he slowly lifted his hand the lady's glance followed it in feverish excitement. What he did was to move a pawn one step forward. It was an excellent move which, while seeming to involve certain risks each of them tractable, would secure a small but decisive advantage many moves later. But the lady was bitterly disappointed and complained to her husband. 40 minutes he took, thinking and thinking. And all for such a tiny move. Why, this must be a crazy game. She turned her pretty back and never went near another chess tournament. It is this lack of appeal to the more primitive spectator that makes chess tournaments an inevitably poor proposition in a commercialized age. Let us, then, glance at the epoch in which Lasker rose to fame. It was the age of Wilhelm II, the end of the Victorian era, a time in which the type of modern conquistador was predominant. Men such as Cecil Rhodes, Leopold of Belgium, Rockefeller and a new generation of industrial magnates. What mattered was colonial enterprise and the acquisition of more and more rubber, silver mines, iron ore and steel, more and better electrification and combustion engines. Huge undeveloped areas were civilized more quickly and efficiently than Columbus and Vasco da Gama could ever dream of. The result was an enormous agglomeration of wealth and a substantial feeling of security. Never had mankind been as pacifists as in the couple of decades round about the turn of the century. True enough, there were rows about colonial possessions, the mailed fist vied with invincible dreadnoughts, there was a good deal of espionage and commercial jealousy, there was a spot of war in China, in South Africa, in the Philippines, but in Western Europe and the USA it merely added to the spice of life and to the satisfaction of being wealthy and getting more so every year. 20 for Emanuel Lasker. Some crumbs from that very rich table inevitably came to the chess masters too, not many crumbs, to be sure, nor very fat ones, but just enough for a number of masters to make some sort of a living. To be a chess master had become a profession like being an actor, a singer, a trapeze artist, but it was rather more precarious. Many came and were gone with the wind, but a few reached the pinnacle and stayed up for quite some time. A good many of the international tournaments were sponsored by famous watering resorts which would gain ample publicity value for the relatively small financial outlay involved. But in most of the other tournaments organized by national federations the financial basis was a more or less modest collection of funds from clubs and individuals. At best it would provide enough to pay for the expenses of the competing masters and to send the 6 or 8 prize winners away with enough to live on for periods ranging from a few weeks to several months. Anyway, by then so long as they were successful they could safely rely on being invited to some other tournament, and in between tournaments there were other ways for a successful and industrious chess master to make a living. He could give simultaneous performances, playing 20 or 30 or rather more games by hustling from board to board and making his moves at a moment's notice a grueling job of many hours' work. Moreover, if so inclined and trained he could give blindfold performances, playing a number of opponents who would have plenty of time to study the position on the board while the performing master, sitting in splendid isolation and deepest concentration, must memorize all the games and call out his own moves as soon as the opponent's move had been announced. If booked for a regular tour of such performances the master could earn a few fees, get a little publicity, and sell some of his books. But it was a hard life. It meant getting around a bit too, but the trouble with most chess masters is that they get little change out of all their travels. No matter whether they happen to be in Sweden or in some Mediterranean resort, in South America or in Moscow, they rarely see more than a large room filled with chess boards, and for most of them life has little meaning beyond the infinite adventures of those 32 wooden symbols moving about their 64 squares. One may well ask, why all these exertions? Why all this trouble and heartbreak for a mere game? Why, if at best its leading protagonists can wrest from it a modest and precarious livelihood? Why indeed? But then, why do men risk their lives to climb the lure of professional chess 25 mountain? Why do they kill one another for some religious or political idea? Why do they commit suicide, murder or other inexplicable follies when touched, moved, and driven by that finest and most inexplicable of human emotions, love? The answer is that life is irrational, life is inconsequential, contradictory, impenetrable and unfathomable. It is risky too, and only he who dares to tackle life can play for a win, to use a term of the chess player's own vernacular. He mustn't be afraid, though, to move around the quagmire of irrationalism. He who will have naught but cool sobriety and common sense may well have a long life, but it might be a pretty dull one. As for the chess master, let us praise him for his courage to live for a mere dream, a queen's sacrifice, a mate in 3 moves. Readers may now have an inkling of how and why it was so decisive a crossroad in Emanuel Lasker's life when he failed to resist the temptation of going to Breslau in the summer of 1889 to compete in the Congress organized by the German Chess Federation. Apart from minor tournaments for various groups of amateurs there was one for recognized masters and one for those aspiring to such honor. The winner of that tournament would be awarded the official title Oberschurfkapmeister, a dignity achieved by C.B.E. Tarash in the preceding Congress, a couple of years earlier. Hence, at Breslau, he played in the master tournament, while young Lasker, a newcomer to the Congress, had to earn his spurs in the aspirants' tourney. Lasker did earn them. He won the tournament, but only by the narrowest margin possible. And, indeed, by a fluke entirely outside his own control. Thereby hangs a tale, and since it happens to be very odd and never yet published in its entirety, not even in the original edition of this book, and since it certainly made or helped to make chess history, it may as well be given some space here. That particular Hauptturnier, meaning the candidates' tournament, the victor of which would obtain the master title conferred by the German Federation, was a specially strong one. The competitors, apart from young Lasker, including Lipka, who later became quite a well-known master, as well as another highly gifted player called von Firefsel. As a matter of fact, Firefel beat Lasker in their individual game, and since Lasker dropped another point against a ranked outsider, he was very lucky to come out equal with von Firefel, who had lost only one game to Lipka and drawn two others. Now the odd thing was that Firefel should never have lost the game. What happened was that when he and Lipka put up 26 Emanuel Lasker the position after the adjournment, they did so from memory without bothering to play through the whole game, and it so happened that they forgot to put up Firefel's RP, with the result that his first move after the adjournment was an illegal one. In point of fact, he moved his R to where his P was supposed to be **. Now, according to the rules, as soon as the mistake was discovered and claimed, all the moves played after the adjournment should have been considered illegal and a replay would have had to be ordered by the tournament director. But as it happened, the mistake was not claimed while the game was still on, and it only came to be mentioned long after the end of the tournament. What happened was that poor Firefel, who should have drawn the game with ease, lost it after the Gruna-Link battle of over 100 moves. Now, so far as chess history is concerned, the intriguing if somewhat speculative point is this: that a proper outcome of that odd game may well have finished Lasker's chess career before it ever began. Of course, if Firefel had drawn that game, he would have been half a point ahead of Lasker, and the undisputed winner of the tournament. And it may well be that Lasker, had he failed to achieve the master title at that first attempt, would have given up chess altogether. In fact, he had repeatedly told his brother Bertold that he would do so. Hence, the odd and somewhat fishy circumstances of that Firefel-Lipka game may well have turned out to be one of the greatest blessings in disguise for chess history and chess literature. Since Firefel lost the game, he was level with Lasker. They had two playoff and Lasker won the decisive game quite convincingly. Translator's note: here is the adjourned position of that crucial game. According to the official report of the tournament committee dug out by J. Gilchrist and K. Wild for their complete score of Lasker's games, White's illegal 53rd move was RKR2. Translator's note: since this game, having never been published except in the records of the Breslau Congress, is practically unknown and yet of some historical significance, as it were, I have included it in the games section of this book. See Game 3-8, Pace 41. The lure of professional chess, thereby winning the title which enabled him to compete in master tournaments. In the concurrent principal event of the Congress, the International Master Tournament, young Tarrasch was equally successful. Out of 17 games he scored 13 points, well ahead of quite a bevy of famous masters, such as Byrne, Mises, von Barthelben, Bauer, Gunsberg, Poulsen, Blackburn, Mason. Thus, the young undergraduate and the small boy who had met in the old tea room had made some headway. Tarrasch had emerged as one of the top-ranking masters of Europe, but Lasker had only just earned the title. He had merely put his foot on the bottom rung of the ladder while Tarrasch was already very near the top. Lasker was at the start of his climb, but even at that early stage Samuel Haller, chess editor of The Field, England's most important chess column, had this to say about him: Herr Lasker, the rising player from Berlin, shows considerable talent for the game and will probably be the future master. For the time being, though, Hofer's prophecy still seemed far from being vindicated. Immediately after the Breslau Congress, the young Miesler was honored by an invitation to compete in a small international master tournament at Amsterdam. For the first time in his life, Lasker crossed the German border and got the thrill and experience of being abroad in a foreign land. In the tournament he won the Brilliancy Prize for his stunning sacrifice of both bishops against J. H. Bauer. See page 37, one of the gems of chess literature which was to be reprinted over and over again in almost every anthology of such master strokes. But he lost the decisive game against the British master Byrne, who had been runner-up to Tarrasch in the Breslau tournament and who went ahead to win the Amsterdam event with 7 points out of 8 games. Lasker scored only 6 points and had to be content with the second prize. Certainly a gratifying success for one so young, but nothing very sensational. Back in Berlin, Lasker soon gave a few simultaneous performances, and then played a short match against C. von Barthelben, who had come fourth at Breslau and who, at that time, was considered one of the aces of the Berlin chess fraternity. Lasker won 2 games, lost 1 and drew 1, certainly a remarkable success, though again not exactly magnificent. Nor was he to fare any better when, early in 1890, he went to compete in a small Austrian tournament at Graz. True, he didn't lose the game, but his 3 wins and 3 draws only sufficed for third prize, Makkevets and Bauer, his Amsterdam victim, being ahead of him. Somewhat depressed, Lasker returned to Berlin, and it was a 28 Emanuel Lasker. Lucky chance for him that the veteran British master Bird was prepared to play the match against the budding German master. Bird himself and most of the experts expected that, while it would be a stiff and fairly even contest, the odds were still on the older man. Yet Lasker won the match convincingly with 7 wins, 2 losses, and 3 draws. Soon afterwards he played the match against J. Mises, a highly renowned master of the younger German generation and the third prize winner at the recent Breslau Congress. Lasker won that match even more convincingly by 5-0, with 3 draws, and now indeed Sam Hoffer's prophetic words of the year before seemed to be nearer vindication, as the entire chess world began to keep a watchful eye on that dangerous young man.